Here is the total process, the process that we're working with. And we've just looked at the interviews. And now we're going to look at decisions, how you decide which candidate or candidates you are going to offer a role to. So making a decision is, again, a very critical part of the recruitment and selection process, because ensuring that you're having the right fit for the role with the person with the competencies and the attainments that you need is really where we're at here. And I guess we've all been in situations where there has been a round peg put in a square hole, you know, and that is uncomfortable for the person. And frankly, it's uncomfortable for the organization. So it's really important that particularly when we're recruiting volunteers, that we are ensuring that there is a good fit for the volunteer. In my experience of working with charities for so many years, a warm breathing body isn't necessarily the decision criteria you should use. A person with the right attainments, skills, knowledge, previous experience, and competencies in terms of behaviours is so important. And even if you have completed your interviews, and when you come to this part, your rating of the candidates, you find that there is too much of a gap, my strong encouragement would be to go back and try and find some new candidates. And or look at the competencies that the candidate has been able to demonstrate and think, is there a role in the organisation for them? And or how much training will we need to give to this candidate if we appoint this person into this volunteering role? Because that's really what comes from this decision-making part, is you then thinking about what onboarding training might we need to give to this person if we appoint them. So it is about matching the role with the right person. And for this, you'll need to have your person spec with you and the interview notes that you've taken. And as you're referring to your interview notes, it's usually helpful to have a highlighter pen so that you can start to highlight the statements that the candidate has made that relate to the competencies and the attainments that you've already defined in your person spec, so that you're linking what the person has said to, oh yes, that's the competence we need, oh yes, and he talked about that there, and then she talked about that there. So really helpful, easy tip to have a highlighter pen to highlight aspects in the notes that you've made in terms of the key attainments and competencies. And then you complete the scoring grid, and I'm going to talk about this shortly. And there is one in your resource pack. And even if you, number one, even if you have a sense of which candidate was the strongest, and number two, even if you only had one candidate, it's really important to go through the protocol of using the scoring grid, because what the scoring grid will do, it will give you some objective information that will then help you to formulate your onboarding plan for the candidate. Then you make your selection, and then once you've used the scoring grid, you know why you've made the selection. And then you make sure you follow up with each candidate as you described in the part of WASP, in the ending of the interview. You follow up with each candidate in line with how you described it, and let them know your decision. And as I said, there is a template for the scoring grid in your resource pack. And this is what the scoring grid looks like. So there are 6 elements that you can use, 6 assessing elements that you can use, descriptions that you can use to rate the information that you have that you've gathered from the interview. And as you can see there, it runs from 0, which is no experience and no examples, to extensive and exceptional experience and examples. And 1 through to 4 is the grading scale that we have on the rating scale. So this is what it looks like, and this is what it looks like in your resource pack. So there's a section for general questions that you might make some notes on how the person answered your general questions. But this part talks about the attainment. So the questions that you asked about attainment, which is about skills, knowledge, previous experience, and any specific qualifications. And it's really useful to write those questions down. So you'll have one of these rating sheets for each candidate. You can see the candidate's name at the top, the role that you're interviewing, and the date of the interview and who the interviewers were. And you'll have one of these per candidate. You will write your questions in the boxes on the left, and then you will make your assessment about how the person answered that question and where you would rate them on the scale. And also how the person answered the question will give you an idea of any induction training that you need to undertake with them, onboarding training. And you would circle the rate that at the scale, you would circle the score that you are giving the candidate for each question. And the same goes for the competencies. And here we put a competence example in here. The question that was asked at interview: can you tell me about a time when you've needed to solve a problem that was new to you? How did you go about it? And what was the result? This is the competence of problem solving. And for this candidate, they gave an answer that rated at 3. And what that has caused us to consider is that we'll need to give them extra time in on the helpline in terms of their onboarding training. Perhaps their answer didn't include some of the aspects of the helpline that they'll need to complete for you, but they have worked on a helpline before, and they've given you some examples of a helpline. So that's the rating that the person would get for that particular competence. And then you would have next question, you do the same thing, you give them a score for each question. And here is a rating scale grid for 3 candidates. And you can see that each candidate got different scores for the specific questions, for the attainment scores, the competence scores, and the general question scores. And then we have a clear candidate here that would we appoint, which would be Sheila. And what this does also, particularly from an equal opportunities perspective, is it makes your process transparent. So just say you have someone who isn't appointed and they are not very happy about that. You can then be very transparent with them that there was somebody who was able to demonstrate more of the attainment element of the role than they had. You don't necessarily need to show them your rating scale, but what you can say hand on heart is there was a candidate that had more actual experience of this particular, because that would come into the attainment score, remembering that attainments are skills, knowledge, previous experience, and specific qualifications. So that's how you would use a rating scale to actually rate your candidates. And as I said, even if you just have one candidate, it's a really important process to go through. It helps you to clarify where any gaps might be that you will need to fill when you come to your onboarding training. So you've decided which candidate or candidates are going to be successful based on their scores. And as I said, even if you only have one candidate, it's a really valuable exercise to undertake. Relaying your decisions to the successful candidates and to the unsuccessful candidates. And from your ratings sheet, you can start to plan your onboarding training for your candidates. Now, again, onboarding and induction training may not be something that you have necessarily invested a lot of time in. I'm going to talk about the value of doing that shortly. So again, here is an opportunity for you to pause. I imagine that a rating scale and using this transparent process might be new to many people. So this is an opportunity for you to pause the video and think about how that applies to you and your organization. And Cheryl, what frequently asked questions do you have where this element of recruitment and selection is concerned?
Well, one that immediately sprang to mind was the use of the grid, giving everybody a score. It's easy to imagine a situation where when you add all the scores together of all of each candidate, you get a tie.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, then you have to choose which candidate you think will fit in best, frankly, because what in that case, what you've got are candidates that have demonstrated exactly the same level of attainment and exactly the same level of competence for the role that you are recruiting for. So one of the things that is important when we are bringing people into the organization is their cultural fit, how they're going to fit into the organization. Now that is a subjective assessment whereby you are subjectively assessing the person, where what we have done previously is used an objective process. We've got our objective questions, we've asked the same questions to every candidate, and we've used the rating scale, which is a very objective process. But if you have tying candidates, then I would say one of the things to consider is how they would fit into the overall organization, and or would it be a case of sharing the role? I don't know. In terms of thinking outside the box, and you know, really good to bring two talented people into the organization. Does it afford you the opportunity to think about the future? Might you put one person on hold and bring them back for another role in sort of at another time? So yeah, it gives you, it's a tricky one, but I think cultural fit would be something that you would have been assessing during the course of the interview.
That's lovely. Thank you. And when you tell people that that they've been successful or unsuccessful, is there a sort of specified time limit you should do that in, or is it just whatever you set out at the start of the interview?
Yes, well, it's important that you follow through in the way that you described that you would do when we were at the part, you know, when the ending part of the interview, where you talked about timescales. So it is really important to think about the timescales of giving decisions before you actually go into your interview, so that you can give accurate information. If for some reason there is a delay in you making your decision, then it's a respectful thing to actually let your candidates know. There's been a slight delay. We'll get back. We'll be able to get back to you in X number of days or next week. I think candidates, you know, people that have come for interview that are still waiting for feedback a month later is a bad show, really. It's yeah, it's and particularly because volunteers are such precious resources. And we've talked about this a little bit during the course of this series already, about the difference between employed people and volunteer people. And this is a personal view. This is a personal view. The status really shouldn't matter whether they get treated differently. In my view, I think that volunteers should get treated with the same amount of respect as a paid employee should, because they are such valuable resources to charities and CICs, that the way they're treated does impact the way that they perform. So whilst employed employees may have a appraisal process, a performance review process, and I hope that volunteers will also get feedback about how they're doing. But I do think that both volunteer and employees should be interviewed and recruited and selected in the same way. And I know that is my personal view as an HR director, and I would like to say I am not stating a view in the way that says it's CIB's protocol or way of going about it. It's just my way as an HR director. Anybody that comes for an interview should be treated the same.
That sounds very reasonable. Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you.